Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Picture this. It's 1879 in the scorching California desert. A man strikes it rich, discovering what he believes to be one of the most valuable silver deposits in the American West. He's so confident that he boasts about building his family a house with doorknobs and steps made of pure silver, but he refuses to tell anyone where this incredible mine is located. Within months, he's dead, murdered over his secret, and his killer disappears forever. The mine? Still out there, somewhere in the Mojave Desert, waiting to make someone incredibly wealthy. This is the true story of Lee's lost mine, a tale of greed, murder, and political corruption that reads like a Hollywood thriller. The story begins in 1879, when silver fever gripped the American West. In the remote desert between Yucca and Victorville, California, prospector G. Lee made a discovery that would cost him his life. Lee was an experienced miner who had already struck it big, discovering the famous silver deposit at Red Mountain near Barstow. That mine, known as the Pencil Lead Mine, had made Lee wealthy, but not for long. Enter Robert W. Waterman, who would later serve as California's lieutenant governor. Through questionable means, Waterman appropriated Lee's Pencil Lead Mine, leaving the prospector dispossessed and furious. But Lee was far from defeated. He would find an even better mine. Striking out across the harsh Mojave Desert toward Cottonwood Springs, Lee began his search for redemption. The desert was unforgiving, scorching days, freezing nights, scarce water. But Lee knew these lands and what to look for. He had developed an eye for the subtle geological signs that escaped less experienced prospectors. When Lee returned to Barstow, he carried ore samples that would change everything. The silver content was extraordinary. He bragged openly about his discovery, telling anyone who would listen that this new mine would make him wealthy beyond imagination. He would build his family the finest house in California, complete with doorknobs and steps carved from solid silver. But Lee had learned from the Pencil Lead incident. This time, he would tell absolutely no one where his discovery was located, not friends, family, or business partners. The secret would remain locked in his head alone. However, Lee's secrecy created problems. Mining operations required significant investment, and investors wanted assurance the mine existed. Lee found a partner in Stewart, a crippled assayer from Los Angeles confined to a wheelchair. Stewart had funds and expertise but couldn't visit the remote location. Instead, he insisted Lee take along a trusted friend who could verify the mine's existence. This led to one of the most intriguing episodes in the saga. On a blazing summer day in 1879, Lee and Stewart's representatives set out from Old Woman Springs in a light buckboard. They waited until 3 p.m. to avoid the worst heat, though temperatures still soared over 100 degrees. For nearly 3 hours they traveled slowly across desert terrain, their horses struggling in oppressive heat. As evening approached, Lee called a halt and announced they would camp. While his companions set up shelter, Lee vanished into the desert. For hours, Stewart's friend waited alone, wondering if Lee had abandoned him or met some terrible fate. Then, at 9 p.m., Lee materialized from the darkness carrying ore samples. But Lee's paranoia ruled his actions. Despite Stewart's trust in his representative, Lee refused to display the samples. The message was clear. Stewart could trust his friend, but Lee trusted no one. This pattern continued for months. Lee would disappear into the desert for days, always returning with samples, always refusing to reveal his destination. He had taken residence with a man named Brown on the Mojave River banks, and Brown grew accustomed to Lee's mysterious expeditions. But on one fateful trip, Lee encountered Hans Hoffman waiting at Old Woman Springs. Hoffman was a weathered desert prospector whom Lee recognized as one of Waterman's associates. Lee's suspicions were instantly aroused. Hoffman appeared friendly, offering whiskey and casual conversation. But Lee wasn't fooled. He accepted drinks while remaining cautious, matching Hoffman shot for shot while maintaining his wits. As alcohol flowed, Hoffman's questions became pointed. Where was Lee's mine? How rich were the samples? Would Lee consider additional partners? Lee's responses grew increasingly evasive. He had been down this road with Waterman and the Pencil Lead mine. No matter how much whiskey Hoffman provided, Lee refused to divulge his mine's location. As Lee's refusal became clear, Hoffman's demeanor changed dramatically. In sudden rage and frustration, Hoffman grabbed a heavy rock and brought it down on Lee's skull with crushing force. The blow killed Lee instantly, silencing forever the only person who knew the location of what might have been the richest silver mine in California. Standing over Lee's body, Hoffman sobered as the magnitude of his actions became clear. Working frantically, he dug a shallow grave and built a fire over it, hoping ashes would disguise the freshly disturbed earth. But fate intervened. As Hoffman worked, two horsemen approached the springs. Hoffman's nervous, evasive behavior aroused their suspicions. The horsemen had whiskey and put it to good use, gradually extracting the terrible truth. Hoffman had been paid $500 to either discover Lee's mine location or kill him in the attempt. The source of this blood money was Robert Waterman himself. After Hoffman showed them Lee's burial site and collapsed into drunken stupor, the witnesses raced to San Bernardino to report the murder to Sheriff John Buckhart. But Waterman's network extended far beyond the desert. Word reached Barstow, and Waterman dispatched armed men to help Hoffman escape before the law arrived. The sheriff won the race, arresting Hoffman before Waterman's gunmen could interfere. But Waterman's stake in the trial was enormous. If Hoffman cooperated with prosecutors, Waterman's role could be exposed. Using his wealth and connections, Waterman hired the finest legal representation available. What followed was one of San Bernardino County's longest court battles, stretching from 1880 through 1881. The defense claimed the body wasn't Lee but an Indian woman kicked to death by a horse. But the prosecution had compelling evidence. Lee's dentist identified the deceased's teeth, which he had filled with silver from Lee's own claims. Even more convincing was the victim's height. Lee stood over 6 feet tall, while local Indian women were typically short and compact. Despite this evidence, both trials ended in hung juries, with 11 jurors voting for conviction and 1 holdout. Citizens speculated that Waterman had placed a paid agent on the jury. As the court prepared for a third trial, Waterman's lawyers secured Hoffman's release on $15,000 bail. Hoffman immediately vanished forever. Lee's heirs sued Waterman and won a staggering $300,000 judgment. Even Waterman's own brother sued him over their Pencil Lead mine partnership. Remarkably, despite these scandals, Waterman was elected lieutenant governor, suggesting his questionable ethics were overlooked by California's power brokers. But what about Lee's mine? The secret died with its discoverer, leaving only tantalizing clues. The most significant lies in understanding geography. Today's Old Woman Springs is actually 1 mile east of the original springs where Lee met his fate. The original oasis, named by Colonel Henry Washington in 1855, was later renamed Cottonwood Spring. Rancher Al Swarthout developed new water to the east and appropriated the Old Woman Springs name. This geographic confusion has led treasure hunters astray. Lee's 3-hour buckboard journey should be calculated from present-day Cottonwood Springs, not current old woman springs. This correction significantly changes the potential search area. Modern prospectors focus on areas around known operations like the Blue Ribbon Silver Mine and the old Akron Silver Reef mines. Some suggest Lee's deposit might have contained gold rather than silver, given the Santa Fe and Lester gold mines nearby. Today, the Lucerne Valley attracts rock collectors searching for verde, antique, agate, and jasper. Perhaps one of these modern treasure hunters will stumble upon the secret that neither whiskey nor violence could extract from G. Lee. Somewhere in the vast Mojave Desert, a fortune in precious metals still waits, protected by the silence of a man who preferred death to betrayal. The story of Lee's lost mine remains one of the American West's most compelling unsolved mysteries, where greed, politics, and murder intersected in the unforgiving desert, leaving behind a legend that continues to lure treasure hunters more than 140 years later. Imagine this: an old prospector clutching his chest, crawling down a treacherous mountainside in the dead of night. His heart is giving out, but he's not dying from exhaustion or dehydration. He's having a heart attack from pure excitement. In his pocket lies a rock chip that will assay out at $60,000 per ton. Behind him, somewhere in the darkness of that L-shaped peak, lies a fortune that 3 separate groups of miners have found and lost. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're venturing into one of America's most unforgiving landscapes to tell you about 3 separate gold discoveries that vanished as mysteriously as they were found. This is the story of Manly Peak and the fortunes that still wait in its granite heart. Death Valley, the lowest, hottest, driest place in North America. Temperatures here reach 134 degrees Fahrenheit. The landscape looks like Mars had a bad day. But rising from this hellish moonscape like a granite fortress stands Manly Peak, 7,158 feet of iron-rich rock that has been whispering secrets of gold to those brave enough to listen. Our story begins with a document that reads like a treasure map crossed with a survival guide. An unnamed prospector recorded detailed directions to reach this remote peak and documented 3 separate encounters with gold so rich it drove men to the edge of madness. Each discovery worth tens of thousands of dollars per ton, each one lost again to the mountain's unforgiving terrain. The journey begins where the pavement ends, at Jubilee Pass, dropping into Death Valley. The road ahead isn't maintained. Warning signs tell you there are no services, no help, no hope if things go wrong. You're carrying 10 gallons of gas, 5 gallons of water, and enough supplies to survive sandstorms, tire blowouts, and temperatures that can kill. 30 miles from the valley floor, past the Striped Butte, a half-mile-long rock formation painted in impossible colors, past Anvil Springs fed by mysterious underground rivers that never run dry, you finally reach the western base of Manly Peak, and that's where our 3 stories begin. The first lost mine belongs to our narrator himself, and it begins with a partnership that would end in obsession and tragedy. Picture 2 experienced prospectors working the rough granite slopes. The Alaskan miner, a veteran of countless expeditions, working separately to cover more ground. As the sun begins its descent, he's out of food, out of water, and racing against darkness. That's when he spots it. A vein in the granite coated with light brown mud that makes it look worthless. But something about its weight catches his attention. In the growing darkness, with his strength fading, he chips off a sample and lugs it back to camp. For 3 weeks that sample sits forgotten in his pack. When they finally get around to panning that muddy chunk of rock, they discover they're holding $15,000 worth of gold ore per ton. In today's money, we're talking about a fortune that would make you wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. But here's where the story turns tragic. The Alaskan miner becomes obsessed with finding that vein again. Day after day, week after week, he searches the treacherous slopes. The mountain's granite face is littered with loose pebbles on smooth rock, perfect for sending a man tumbling to his death. Rattlesnakes coil in the shadows. Scorpions wait under every stone. But none of these dangers stop his desperate search. Our narrator watched his partner descend into near madness, combing every inch of that L-shaped summit until the day he died. The vein was never found again. Somewhere on Manly Peak, a fortune worth millions in today's currency remains hidden. The second lost mine came to light through a chance encounter in a Dawson, Alaska cafe, that legendary gold rush town where fortunes were made and lost over coffee. A Colorado miner, fresh from evaluating placer claims, sits down across from a grizzled prospector who pulls out a chunk of rock that glitters with possibility. The Alaska prospector's story is tantalizingly brief. He'd been crossing the north side of Manly Peak when he discovered this sample. But before he could investigate further, a letter arrived calling him to Alaska for work. The rock traveled thousands of miles north before anyone thought to test it. When they did, the results sent the Colorado miner on a pilgrimage to Death Valley. Winter storms and brutal conditions hampered his search. Month after month, he combed the northern slopes, but Manly Peak had swallowed the vein completely. The Colorado miner promised to return in summer, but whether he ever found his fortune remains a mystery lost to time. But it's the third lost mine that contains the most dramatic chapter in this saga. This story begins with two desperate prospectors arriving at our narrator's camp in the middle of Death Valley's worst winter weather, driven by the promise of the richest discovery yet recorded. Their backer had taken the most dangerous route possible to reach the summit, through Coyote Canyon, the steepest approach to Manly Peak. His doctor had warned him never to go above 4,000 feet due to his heart condition, but the lure of gold drove him to nearly double that elevation, climbing all the way to the 7,156-foot summit. At the top, he discovered something extraordinary, an old tunnel, half filled with mysterious water, and above it, a small vein snaking up the mountainside. When he chipped a sample from that vein and examined it in the fading light, the excitement was too much for his failing heart. Can you imagine the terror? Alone on a mountain peak, clutching a piece of rock worth $60,000 per ton, his heart giving out from the shock of discovery. Somehow, he managed to crawl back down that treacherous slope to his vehicle. Somehow, he survived the journey to the hospital. And when he finally recovered enough to have his sample assayed, it confirmed his wildest dreams and funded the expedition that would ultimately fail. The two prospectors he grub-staked came unprepared for Death Valley's winter fury. Without adequate fuel or supplies, they retreated after only a short search, leaving behind a fortune that remains hidden in the granite maze of Manly Peak's summit. Today, all three discoveries remain lost. Somewhere within a few square miles of Manly Peak's distinctive L-shaped summit, fortunes worth millions wait in the granite. The iron-rich hornblende granite that forms the peak is exactly the type of rock formation that hosts spectacular gold deposits. The evidence is overwhelming. Multiple independent sources, physical samples, verified assays. But Manly Peak guards its secrets jealously. The mountain's treacherous terrain makes precise navigation nearly impossible. Smooth granite faces dotted with loose pebbles create death traps. Wildlife hazards lurk everywhere. Rattlesnakes, sidewinders, scorpions, and tarantulas making their homes in rocky crevices. The legal situation is encouraging for modern treasure hunters. Much of the western area around Manly Peak is open for mineral location and claims. What makes this story particularly compelling is the credibility of the sources. Our narrator wasn't some wild-eyed dreamer spinning tall tales. His account includes precise geographical references and realistic danger assessments. The Colorado miner was a professional employed by a mining company. The heart attack victim's story was corroborated by the prospectors he financed. These weren't legends passed down through generations. These were documented discoveries by experienced professionals who understood exactly what they had found and exactly what they had lost. Modern technology offers advantages our historical prospectors never had. GPS systems can mark locations with pinpoint accuracy. Ground-penetrating radar might locate that mysterious water-filled tunnel. Metal detectors could identify areas of high mineralization. But technology can't overcome the fundamental challenge that defeated three separate expeditions: the mountain itself. Manly Peak's granite face remains as treacherous as ever. Weather conditions can change from pleasant to deadly in minutes. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and the searcher becomes another cautionary tale. As our story draws to a close, the fortunes of Manly Peak remain exactly where they've always been, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right combination of skill, preparation, luck, and courage to stumble upon them again. Three separate veins of incredibly rich gold ore, clustered within a few miles of each other, worth millions at today's precious metal prices. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. Imagine this. It's a freezing winter night in 1862 in the rough mining town of Aurora, Nevada. The saloons are packed, whiskey is flowing, and suddenly someone bursts through the swinging doors shouting just one word: "White man." Within minutes, the entire town erupts into chaos. Men abandon their card games, gulp down their drinks, and rush into the bitter cold. By dawn, Aurora is a ghost town. Every soul has vanished into the Sierra Nevada mountains, chasing after one mysterious figure and his map to unimaginable riches. This isn't fiction, folks. This is the true story of the lost cement mine and the incredible boom and bust saga of Mammoth City, a tale that Mark Twain himself witnessed firsthand, involving German brothers, catastrophic engineering failures, and enough gold fever to drive an entire region completely mad. The story starts in the early 1850s during the height of California's gold rush. Three German brothers, their names lost to history, had traveled thousands of miles to strike it rich in the American West. While resting in a secluded canyon in Mono County, they made a discovery that would haunt the Sierra Nevada for decades. There, embedded in the rock face, was a vein of cement absolutely riddled with chunks of dull yellow metal. When they tested their find, they discovered something that would have made them the wealthiest men in California. The cement was 2/3 pure gold. Imagine their excitement, their disbelief, their desperate calculations of wealth beyond imagination. They loaded themselves down with rock samples, carefully mapped the location, then covered up the vein and began the treacherous journey back to civilization. The Sierra Nevada, however, had other plans. The brutal mountain crossing claimed two of the three brothers. The sole survivor reached the Motherlode settlement so utterly broken by the ordeal that he never found the strength to return to his fortune. On his deathbed, he passed his map and precious rock samples to a local miner named Whiteman, setting in motion one of the West's most enduring treasure hunts. Whiteman became obsessed, spending the rest of his life wandering the Sierra Nevada, following that cryptic map. But here's where the story gets truly wild. Whiteman's quest became legendary throughout the mining camps of California and Nevada. Mark Twain, working the silver mines in Nevada's Esmeralda district, witnessed this phenomenon firsthand. In his camp at Aurora, Twain got what he called one accidental glimpse of the mysterious Whiteman who carried a chunk of that original cement. Twain later wrote that virgin gold was as thick in it as raisins in a slice of fruitcake. The mere rumor of Whiteman's presence could trigger absolute pandemonium. Twain described scenes that sound almost too incredible to believe. I have known it reported at 11 at night in a large mining camp that Whiteman had just passed through, and in 2 hours the streets, so quiet before, would be swarming with men and animals. Picture the complete abandonment of reason. Every individual tried to be secretive while simultaneously whispering to neighbors that W had passed through. By daylight, in the dead of winter, entire camps would be deserted, their populations having vanished into the mountains chasing this elusive figure and his promise of unimaginable wealth. Then, in June 1877, fantasy seemed to become reality. A group led by James A. Parker made a genuine discovery on Gold Mountain, east of what is now Lake Mary in the eastern Sierra. They found a wide ledge of silver-gold ore and immediately announced it as the largest bonanza outside of Virginia City. By August, a Comstock company had optioned it for $40,000. Before the mountain snows had melted the following spring, the company had sent in miners and ordered a massive 40-stamp mill to process the ore. This news sent miners' hearts racing throughout California and Nevada. The stampede was on, and this time it wasn't chasing shadows. There was real gold in them, their hills. The logistics of reaching this remote location were staggering. Workers hurriedly built a wagon road from Benton Mining Camp to the new Mammoth Mines. Another branch was constructed by J.L.C. Sherwin. Those famous highway switchbacks are still known today as the Sherwin Grade. By April 1878, the traffic was incredible. An Owens Valley resident described the parade. Men bound for the Lake District pass through here daily. Some go afoot, others horseback, while a few navigate by vehicles. One of the most prominent arrivals was General George S. Dodge, a noted California mining investor. When mine owners showed him their property and quoted assay figures, Dodge's response became mining legend. He sat down on a pine stump in the main street, looked up 1,000 feet to the Mammoth outcroppings, and declared, "I don't want to know how rich they are. They'll do for a deal anyhow." With that bold optimism, Dodge bought the mine for $30,000 in cash and mining stock, giving another massive boost to the boom. For the next 2 years, Mammoth City rode the crest of California's mining excitement. By spring 1878, lots were occupied for a full mile up the single street, with at least 20 log houses under construction. By 1879, this remote mountain settlement boasted 2 newspapers, 2 breweries, 6 hotels, 6 general stores, and 22 saloons. 1,000 people had made their way to this impossibly remote location, and town lots were selling for $1,500. The excitement reached fever pitch in April 1879 when the Mammoth Mine struck ore reportedly half gold. Stock prices exploded from $3 to $15 practically overnight. The main street was described as a jam of men and teams coming in from all parts and loaded with every conceivable article. Getting supplies to this remote camp was epic. Freight arrived by 20-mule team over a grueling 220-mile trek from Mojave. Passengers came by tri-weekly coach from Benton, connecting with stages from Nevada's Carson City, 150 miles away. But here's what made Mammoth City truly unique. For at least 4 months every year, it was completely snowbound. During these grim seasons, most houses were buried in snow, with residents literally burrowing down to their front doors. All travel was by skis, which locals called snowshoes. There were no horses in camp during winter. As one resident put it, "We couldn't use them if they were here." Despite the excitement and investment, Mammoth City was dogged by spectacular bad luck. The transportation of mining machinery became an epic saga of mishaps. The massive steam boiler for the stamp mill was successfully carried by rail from San Francisco to Mojave, transferred to one of Nadeau's 20-mule team freight wagons, and pulled across the Mojave Desert for 10 grueling days. Finally, these exhausted animals reached the dreaded Sherwin Grade, just 1 day from their destination. As they labored upward to the tune of cracking whips and jingling chains, disaster struck. The wagon toppled over, and the precious boiler crashed into the canyon below. No amount of straining or engineering could haul it back up. According to local reports, it was still lying there years later, a monument to mining misfortune. Even worse problems awaited. Getting ore from the mine down the dizzy decline to the mill became a comedy of errors. First, miners built a trestle, which promptly blew down in the first heavy wind. Next came a chute lined with sheet iron, but the first carload of ore smashed it to splinters. Undaunted, they erected a covered tramway. On the inaugural ride, the car jumped the track at the very first curve and cracked up spectacularly. After modifications, a car got out of control on an icy track and nearly killed the brakeman. They installed mule power on a more level section. But you really can't make this up. A Sierra breeze actually blew the mule off the track. After that incident, reports claimed mountain storms were slowing production. The real reason, according to locals, was that whenever wind rose in the canyon, the traumatized mule simply laid down and refused to move until the weather passed. Under such relentless misfortune, the Mammoth Company had burned through approximately $385,000 by early 1880, while producing an estimated $200,000 in silver and gold. This was decidedly unsatisfactory to stockholders, and the entire operation shut down for good. The exodus was as dramatic as the boom had been. A snowshoe army of disappointed miners and merchants marched out of Mammoth City. By the spring breakup of 1880, the camp was completely deserted, its ambitious buildings left to the mercy of Sierra storms. And so ends the tale of Mammoth City, but not the legend of the lost cement mine. To this day, nobody has found that elusive vein with gold as thick as raisins in a fruitcake. The mine that drove men to abandon reason, families, and entire communities remains hidden somewhere in the Sierra Nevada, waiting for the next generation of dreamers crazy enough to search for it. Imagine this, $60,000 in gold bars. That's roughly $2 million in today's money. Hidden somewhere in the rugged San Bernardino Mountains of California, waiting for over a century and a half for someone brave enough or foolish enough to find it. This isn't just another treasure hunter's fantasy. This is the true story of a political duel, a gang war, the largest stagecoach robbery in California history, and a secret that died with the last man who knew where the gold was buried. Welcome to another episode of Southwest Desert. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're heading into the wild heart of 1860s California, where justice came from the barrel of a gun and $60,000 in Wells Fargo gold simply vanished. On a personal note, this story takes place in San Bernardino Mountains by where I grew up on a gold mining claim. This gold mystery was researched by my friend Jason Schmidt, who lives at Oak Springs Ranch. Our story begins not with gold or robbery, but with politics and pride. The year was somewhere in the early 1860s, and the crisp mountain air of San Rafael was about to witness an event that would set in motion one of the most extraordinary treasure mysteries in American history. Assemblyman Charles Piercy stood 40 paces from Daniel Showalter, rifles raised in the ancient ritual of the duel. The tension between these men wasn't personal. It was political fire, the kind that burned hot in the simmering cauldron of Western territorial disputes. In an era when disagreements often ended with lead rather than legislation, Piercy and Showalter had chosen the honorable path of armed resolution. The first shot rang out, wild. The second followed, also wide of its mark. But the third shot found its target. Charles Piercy crumpled to the dust of San Rafael, his legislative career ending as abruptly as his life. Daniel Showalter, now a fugitive from justice, had a choice to make: face the hangman's noose or disappear into the lawless wilderness of the San Bernardino Mountains. He chose to run. Showalter found his sanctuary in Holcomb Valley, a place where the rugged, independent spirit of the American frontier still reigned supreme. This wasn't just geography, it was ideology. The mountains were thick with secessionist sentiment and populated by men who viewed government with the same suspicion they reserved for rattlesnakes and claim jumpers. These were the roughs, as they called themselves, and they ran the rough-and-tumble boomtown of Belleville with the kind of frontier justice that came from the loudest voice and the quickest draw. But even in this lawless land, there was a king. His name was Greek George, and his reign was built on fear, violence, and the simple understanding that in Belleville, might made right. George wasn't just another tough guy. He was the embodiment of everything wild and dangerous about the California gold rush. He ruled through intimidation, settled disputes with his fists and his gun, and maintained order through the threat of swift and brutal retaliation. For years, Greek George's word was law in Belleville. The miners, the gamblers, the merchants, they all knew that crossing George meant crossing death itself. His gang controlled the town's most profitable enterprises, and anyone who thought they could challenge his authority quickly learned otherwise. But every king must fall, and Greek George's downfall came on the most American of holidays, the 4th of July. Imagine the scene of Belleville in 1863 or 1864, drunk on whiskey and patriotic fervor. The celebration had already been bloody. Greek George had claimed 3 lives that day, according to Billy Holcomb, who would recount the tale decades later. 3 men lay dead in the dusty streets, victims of George's hair-trigger temper and deadly skills. But as the evening wore on and the whiskey flowed, George made a fatal mistake. In the chaos of the revelry's aftermath, as men stumbled through the streets in various states of intoxication and celebration, a figure approached from behind. They called him Charlie the Chink, a name that reflects the casual racism of the era, and in his hand was a knife. One quick thrust, one moment of violence in a celebration already soaked in blood. And just like that, the reign of Greek George came to its bloody end. The king was dead, but what happens when the king dies and leaves behind a kingdom built on crime? Greek George's gang found themselves leaderless, rudderless, and desperate. These weren't men who knew how to farm or clerk in stores. They were predators, and predators need prey. Their eyes turned to the one thing that represented real wealth in the San Bernardino Mountains: the Wells Fargo stagecoach that carried the fruits of the mines down from the high country. This wasn't just any stagecoach. This was the lifeline of the mountains, the artery that carried liquid wealth in the form of gold bars from the mining camps to the banks and markets of Los Angeles and San Francisco. Week after week, month after month, these coaches rumbled through the dusty canyons loaded with fortune beyond most men's dreams. The Wells Fargo messenger who rode that particular coach had seen his share of danger. Stagecoach robbery was an occupational hazard in the 1860s, and every messenger knew that someday, somewhere, someone would try to relieve him of his cargo. But what happened on that fateful day exceeded even his experienced expectations for audacity. As the coach rattled through one of the countless dusty canyons that wound through the San Bernardino Mountains, Greek George's former gang struck with the precision of men who had nothing left to lose. The messenger, accustomed to danger but not to this level of organized violence, found himself staring down the barrels of multiple guns held by desperate men who knew exactly what they wanted: $60,000 in gold bars. In 1863 money. Think about that for a moment. $60,000 when a working man was lucky to make $500 in a year. This wasn't just robbery. This was the crime of the century. News of the robbery spread like wildfire through the mining camps and settlements. $60,000 in Wells Fargo gold, gone. The honest miners, the merchants, the settlers who had been trying to build something resembling civilization in the wilderness, they were furious. This wasn't just crime. This was an attack on the very foundation of their society. They organized quickly. These were hard men, used to hard work and harder justice. They mounted what they called a relentless pursuit, and they meant every word of it. Hot on the heels of the highwaymen, they rode into the mountains with the grim determination of men who understood that letting this crime go unpunished would mean the end of any hope for order in their territory. What followed was a running battle through some of the most rugged terrain in California. One by one, the bandits fell. Shot down in their flight, they died as they had lived, violently and without ceremony. The pursuers showed no mercy and asked for none in return. Finally, only one bandit remained. Cornered, desperate, and staring death in the face, he tried to bargain for his life. His lips fumbled with the words that could have made him rich beyond measure, or at least kept him breathing. He knew where the gold was hidden. He was ready to talk, ready to reveal the location of the $60,000 that had started this bloody chase. But time ran out. A final shot echoed through the canyons, and the secret of the treasure died with the last man who knew its location. You might think that was the end of the story. The pursuit wasn't entirely in vain. The remaining members of Greek George's gang were eventually captured. They were dragged to a place now called Deep Creek Spillway, which was a natural chasm in the earth that seemed designed by nature itself for frontier justice. There, without ceremony or appeal, they were hanged for their crimes. Their deaths served as a stark warning to anyone else who might think about challenging the burgeoning sense of order in the territory. But the gold? The $60,000 in Wells Fargo treasure? That remained a mystery. The legend persisted, whispered around campfires and in saloons throughout the San Bernardino Mountains. The bandits, local folklore insisted, hadn't been carrying the full weight of the gold when they were captured. Somewhere along their desperate flight, before the hangman's noose found them at Deep Creek, they had managed to offload their ill-gotten gains. Of course, there were many whispers of possible locations for the treasure. There was the Van Dusen Trail, which is now the Coxie Truck Trail, Rock Springs, and the remote Cox Ranch. But one location stood out above all others as the most plausible resting place for the legendary treasure, Oak Springs, which is now known as Oak Springs Ranch. Oak Springs had once been a vital watering hole on what was then a well-traveled route through the mountains. Stagecoaches stopped there regularly, and any bandit familiar with the area would know it well. It was isolated enough to hide treasure, accessible enough to reach in a hurry, and memorable enough to find again, assuming you lived long enough to return. The legend lived on. Oak Springs, now a ranch is shrouded in the lore of lost gold, continues to beckon those who dare to dream of unearthing the long-hidden wealth of Wells Fargo. And that's where our story ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. Because somewhere in the San Bernardino Mountains, possibly at a spring on an abandoned trail, $60,000 in gold bars may still be waiting. Waiting for someone with the courage, the knowledge, and the sheer, stubborn determination to pick up a trail that went cold over 150 years ago. Think about it. $2 million in today's money, hidden by desperate men who took their secret to the grave. It's the kind of treasure that has launched 1,000 expeditions and inspired countless dreams. Some say it's already been found and quietly removed. Others insist it's still there, waiting beneath the California soil for the right person with the right map and the right amount of luck. So the next time you find yourself in the San Bernardino Mountains, take a moment to look around. If you would like to further explore the area, you can rent horses and camp at Oak Springs Ranch. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. If you like a certain image from my videos, tell me in comments and give timestamp. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.